Okay, welcome back to another edition of the Water Matters podcast. I'm excited today to be joined by Ari. Ari, welcome to the Water Matters podcast, your first time.
Thank you so much. Yeah, very nice to come along.
Good. I'm looking forward to our conversation. We are going to talk about Ari's day job, essentially, which is in the world of sustainable water management. Very, very focused on making the most of rainwater, I would suggest. From a company called Our Rainwater Limited, but you know much more about it than me, so I'm going to let you do the introduction, please, to both yourself, bit of background, how did you end up in this sort of position in this marketplace that you're in, and perhaps a bit about the company as well would be good.
Absolutely, sure. Yeah, okay. So I'm Ari. I'm the technical director at Our Rainwater. My background is in hydroinformatics engineering, which is quite a mouthful. But what that means is how do we use information science, computer science, and hydrology to sort of engineer our world and the systems that we use to manage water in our world. So I've got a PhD in that from the University of Exeter, which is where I met Pete and Sarah, who founded Our Rainwater. So Our Rainwater as an organisation, we focus on rainwater management within communities at the household level. So when you're talking about rainwater harvesting, this is sort of the other side of that. So rather than holding back rainwater to reuse and reduce the amount of pressure on water supply networks or to build in resilience for droughts, rainwater management is looking at how do we manage excess rainwater when it's landing in communities. So we're talking there about flooding, we're talking about sewer overflows, which have been in the news a lot recently. So rainwater management is all about managing that rainwater where it lands, and we try and do that in communities, so on the domestic scale. We also look at public buildings, we look at schools, and the technology is very, very similar to rainwater harvesting. It's just how do you make sure there's always space to catch that water and store it and slow down its progress into the drainage networks. So I watched a previous Water Matters podcast episode that I really enjoyed about the beaver dams. So beavers are nature's engineers, aren't they? So they're building their fantastic dams in natural environments, connecting rivers with their floodplains. Yeah. We're trying to emulate that in the urban environment. So we're trying to catch that water and hold it back in the same way that they are. So when they're doing it, it's infiltrating into the ground or it's being taken up by trees. We're trying to hold it back and do something else with it. So whether reuse it or slowly release it into the drainage network so it doesn't overflow.
With the primary sort of, if you, I guess sometimes, or perhaps you're not often asked, like what's the most important, like what would the primary goal be? You know, because we do actually, in our day-to-day business at Graph, you know, rainwater harvesting is a big part of what we do. That's a topic that we've covered a lot on previous episodes. But to your point, there are, you know, there's both ends of the spectrum. We've talked about when we've had not enough rain and when we've had too much rain, all that sort of stuff. What would you say, from your perspective, is like the primary goal that you're looking to achieve?
Well, it's very much two sides of the same coin, isn't it? So with our changing climates, we're seeing more extreme rainfall and more flooding as a result, but we're also seeing more extreme periods of drought. Mm-hmm. The other thing that really factors into rainwater management is the change of land use. So as we're getting more urbanisation, we're getting more impermeable land covers, we're not allowing water to soak back into the ground. And as well as causing flooding, that reduces aquifer recharge. So if you're looking at places in the southeast, in Cambridge, they're drawing water out of their aquifers faster than they're able to refill it back up again. So they're going to be facing, I think they call it the jaws of death, don't they, where the demand exceeds supply for their aquifers. It's sort of like quite a pressing problem. So I don't see necessarily that one of them is more important than the other. Mm-hmm. Having seen and having met some people whose homes have been flooded, the impacts really are devastating. Yeah. But you can't live without water, can you? So yeah. I really feel for the people who have been on bottled water because their water supply has failed. I think it's two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, very much so. And I guess if you're facing one specific scenario at that point, it's very clear to you which is the most important sort of pressing issue, I suppose.
And it's quite regional, isn't it? So I talked about the southeast being quite dry in the summers.
Yeah.
If we're looking at the steep-sided valleys in Cornwall, then they're flooding all the time because there's just not that concentration of water in those steep-sided valleys overwhelms. I mean, Boscastle's the classic example, isn't it, of flooding there. When you have heavy rainfall there, it overwhelms even the rivers. They burst their banks all the time. So it can be very geographically focused, yeah.
And just quickly before we go on to a few examples, why water in the first place? Why that course at university? Just in case we have a few younger listeners on that might be thinking this is all, relatively interesting. I wonder sort of what my route might be into working in the world of sort of water management and stuff. What was it that turned you on to that? And where did that come from? And what did you know about that at the time? Because certainly it was never anything I thought about. It was just sort of ending up in working within the world of sustainable water management was not necessarily by choice for me. It was just kind of evolved into this. But if you chose that for a uni course or whatever, then where did that come from?
That's really embarrassing, actually. So my hobby is cave exploring. That's what I do all the time. So caves.
That sounds quite cool.
In Cornwall, lots of mines. Yeah, it's kind of cool. So I would travel internationally and explore new cave systems and things. So when I approached the University of Exeter, I said I'd really like to do my PhD in looking at how water moves through caves. And they said, well, there's no money in how water moves through caves, but you can look at how water moves through sewers instead. So
okay, less cool.
So less cool. But I thought, I can get into that. And then I realised what a massive problem it is that's completely under the radar in the UK. Less so now. Now we've had the sort of CSO sort of drama in the news. But when I started my course, it felt like something that was a big storm that was going to break very, very soon, and something that we should be investing a lot more time and money into. So I saw it as a real opportunity to sort of get ahead of the curve and be in an area that's developing really rapidly and where innovation is happening in a really exciting way.
Yeah, and living. So that was Exeter, you said, and you live in the southwest now, no? So
yeah, I live in Cornwall now.
How did that quite heavily influence your decision or your interest in that? Because of course, the closer you are to the sea where this sewage is spilled to the sea, presumably it kind of has a bit more impact, no?
Oh, definitely. And I grew up in the Lake District, so all of my childhood walks and things were around Seathwaite Reservoir and Horsewich Reservoir and things. And now there's the Save Windermere campaign, which is looking at reducing CSOs into bathing waters in the lakes. But in Cornwall, Surfers Against Sewage is founded and exists in my hometown, St Agnes. That's where I live. So there's a big link there. I'm part of the sort of search and rescue team there, and our swiftwater rescue guys are in the rivers and streams in flood environments where it is full of sewage. So there's a strong link for people who are out in the outer environment wanting to protect those.
One of the earlier goals with this podcast and the newsletter that gets sent every fortnight alongside it was just to bring the conversation of water to the surface around like dinner tables, in the pub, with friends, with colleagues, because it's not it's not typically an everyday conversation. It'd be much more normal for people to moan to their friends and whatever about the price of electricity or whatever other utilities. Of course, we have seen a difference over the last year or so that water, it kind of it gets more focused now. It's as you said, it's definitely in the news a bit more, and of course with the price rises, it is actually, people are talking about it a bit more than they were. But I think what's interesting there with your choosing to study it and then work in the world of it is I do think it's interesting that it's not something that's talked a lot about in schools, or certainly wasn't when I went to school, and people understanding that there are lots of sort of very interesting options to get involved in that as a career path is actually quite a sort of encouraging thing to think about, and perhaps because there is still a lot of change to come, and a lot of change that will have a very positive impact on, if done right and if done well, has the potential to have a lot of positive impact on the environment and the people within it. I think it could perhaps be a very interesting path for some people to choose, right?
Oh, definitely. And I think we're seeing that more and more in schools now. So if you think about how much recycling was pushed to people of my generation in schools, we had lots of different fluffy animals that would teach us how to do our recycling, and it's become a topic of conversation that you do You do it without thinking, don't you? You take your recycling out every week, every 2 weeks, and it's something that happens really regularly. The sort of plastic bottle lids that stay on bottles I probably caused a bit of a fuss, but people are very happy to have some compromise there, and to spend some time doing that. I think that conversation is entering schools. So the Department for Education now is funding Suds in School schemes, which are introducing sustainable urban drainage systems, so systems that capture water and slow down how long it takes to enter the drainage network to reduce the likelihood of it overflowing in high storm events. And that protects downstream areas of those catchments, so it helps prevent the sewers backing up into people's homes lower down, but it also protects the school sites themselves so that they're less likely to flood. So that improves, student well-being. Those systems, those Suds for School systems, are also tied in with packages of engagement where you teach kids about water. You get them out, you get them playing in water. There are some lovely demos where you can pour water down a drain pipe, you can pour water down a sort of mossy soil bank, down a sort of wooded bank, and you can see how long it takes to get through. And it's a really visual way of seeing what those beavers are doing when they're out there building dams. It's a really good way of seeing how just planting things differently in your garden on the verges of your driveway can have a real impact. So I think we're starting to see it more, and it's something I'd really like to see more of.
And so is that both, just to understand it correctly, that's both something that's physically happening in the school itself, like they are adjusting the way the water is managed, but then they're also using it as a sort of lesson or sort of topic for the students to cover, to actually learn about it at the same time?
Absolutely right, yeah. So the way we do it is we engage the students in designing their own interventions. So we approach the students and we get their ideas about rainwater, and we tie that up in some teaching. And then their designs will end up on the wall. They'll have, sometimes we're able to sort of divert gutters so it looks like rain's falling out of a cloud and things. So they're able to see the designs that end up on their school. And it's used as a teaching tool. Something that we're enjoying doing more of now is adding monitoring devices to these planters so they can see how much water they're saving in real time, like a live dashboard, in the same way that lots of schools have solar panels on the roof now, and they can see how much energy they're saving. They can see how much water they're keeping out of the sewers. So it helps keep that conversation alive. It helps them realise that it's something they should be thinking about day in, day out. I know the sort of toothpaste adverts with turn off the tap was a big thing 5 years ago. I think we'll see more slow the flow stuff in the next 5 years.
And the emphasis on that would be, going back to your original point, more about changing where the rainwater's going and certainly slowing it down, rather than, or as well as, but more so than reuse.
I think they both go hand in hand. So if you're putting a water butt on your downpipe, most houses have 4 downpipes maybe. If you're putting 4 water butts there, you probably aren't going to be using 1,000 litres of water a week to water your garden or wash your car, unless you've got quite a smart system where you can reuse that water in your home, which is, that's the cutting edge. That's fantastic if you can. But most people aren't in a position to do that. So rather than allowing those to fill up and overflow, if you can put an attenuation tap on the bottom that slowly leaks that water back out into the drain, then you're making space for more water the next time it rains. So all of a sudden, you're adding 1,000 litres of storage to the network. If you and your neighbours are doing that in your cul-de-sac, it's very easy to rack up those storage volumes really quickly, and that makes a really significant impact on the amount of water that you're saving from the street to reduce flooding and from the sewer network to reduce overflow. So it's two sides of the same coin. I also think that you can be quite smart about the way that you use them. So just by allowing your water butt to leak out doesn't mean you can never use that water. If you close that tap in the summer so that you're able to use the water in the summer when you need it, and then open it in the winter, you're getting the best of both worlds, really.
Yeah. And that's sort of reminded me about something we were talking about earlier, but before the podcast, in terms of behavioural change, and just, again, going back to my point, I guess, about just trying to encourage more people to think about water, talk about water. You have this Engage the Nation campaign at the moment that I think would be relevant for you to sort of share a bit about, because that's all about trying to learn from others, I suppose, a little bit, is it?
That's exactly what it is. Yeah. We want to understand householders' perceptions around water and water management and water reuse. That's really important, because as an industry, we don't really know how much water people use from their water butts, or whether they're using it to, I say, wash the car or water the garden because it's what I do, but but we don't really know that very well. We don't engage very well as an industry with householders. And it's really key because if your motivations are to reuse water, then the way that you store that water is really important. If your motivation is to just stop it going into the drains and causing sewer overflow, you'd have a very different solution. The example that I come back to when I'm talking about this is the Chelsea Flower Show. So in 2024, we worked with Flood Re, the flood reinsurance company, to design a garden that was going into the Chelsea Flower Show where all of the water that fell on it would be sustainably reused and managed. So the way it worked is it had big storage vessels in the garden that sort of quite attractively poured into each other, and then a big swale in the bottom, a big pond. And it was planted so that when the water level rose, it exposed more plants that were able to cope with the different conditions to that water. In theory, this was sort of simulated for the show because it poured with rain constantly. But in theory, before storm events, those storage containers would empty into the pond and make more space for water automatically. So it's quite a smart system. So the reason I bring that up is because in terms of behavioural change, we'd really like to see more people changing the way they garden, changing the way they use their driveways and the permeable surfaces that are around their house and their properties. Because it's really easy to pave over a driveway to park your car. But if you chose to put gravel in there instead, or a porous resin membrane or something like that, it's a really easy way of taking 5 square meters maybe of impermeable surface and making it permeable, allowing that water to soak back into the ground, recharge aquifers, tackling the supply problem, and reduce the amount of overflow that we get as well. So there's a big behavioural piece in there. So I'd really encourage people to search for Engage the Nation and just share what they do and what they'd like to do. Because once we know that, we can engage water companies, we can engage local authorities, and we can ask to get solutions into people's homes, because that's where they can have the impact.
Yeah, it's about, I can't remember exactly how you described it earlier, but about sort of managing it where it falls rather than waiting until it's sort of being collected and is in the pipe network somewhere down the line.
Absolutely that, yeah. So the phrase that Sarah used was managing rainwater where it lands, and that's because it's really low-hanging fruit. When water's in a downpipe, it's above ground. So when water companies are trying to manage those pipes under roads, under big infrastructure, then they have to shut roads, they have to dig it up, it costs a fortune, it's really disruptive. But while that water is in your downpipes, it's really easy to get to. And also you can make the most of it there as well. So managing it where it lands means you're not concentrating it in one place where a pump failure might cause flooding. Instead, you're spreading that out across, you're distributing it around the catchment, and that gives you an element of resilience. So if you do have a pump failure, that doesn't matter because your water is stored much higher up the catchment. And householders can reuse it as well, so it helps tackle that reuse and demand element as well at the same time.
It makes a lot of sense, and I think it's probably one of the there's not many positive perspectives on the sewage overflows and all that sort of stuff, except for perhaps that it does make you realise that that's being caused because something's not being managed sort of further up, potentially, or certainly that's there's something that can be done first to improve that situation.
Yeah, I think it's quite a complex picture, isn't it? So it is ultimately utilities who have to manage those drainage networks so that they're able to cope with the demands that are put upon them. But we're in an environment that's changed really, really rapidly.
Yeah, they can't control how much it rains.
They can't control how much it rains, or climate change, or how much building we need to do. We're trying to build more and more houses at the moment to cope with the housing crisis, and we're building them in areas where naturally there is more flood risk. If you look at where houses are being built at the moment, just because we have to now, we're running out of land that we can build them on. So there is definitely things we can do as individuals, as householders, to help reduce our impact, in the same way that we can blame people manufacturing plastic products for the plastic in our oceans crisis. We can also recycle at home. So I'm not trying to say that water companies don't have a responsibility to work hard to maintain their networks, because they do, but lots of them are. I'm saying instead, what can we do as individuals, as communities? How can we learn more, teach ourselves more, and do a bit more on the ground to try and help tackle the problem ourselves? So that because it's not just better for the planet, it's better for our communities and for us as well at home if we're using less water.
A large part of your business, as I understand it, is focused on sort of engagement with the homeowners or with people living in properties where water companies may want to encourage them to have a water butt to slow the flow and sort of handle that rainwater before it's made its way into the network. If you could see this as perhaps an opportunity of talking to a group of those potential sort of end users, those homeowners that let's say perhaps might be in that situation, if you had them stood in front of you en masse, what would you like to tell them?
That's very kind, thank you. Well, I'd encourage them to see if their water company will buy them a water butt or a slow the flow device. So at Our Rainwater, what we do is we connect householders with water companies. So if there is a scheme in your area, then you can sign up on Our Rainwater's website and we will connect you with your water company and make sure you get a device. And if there's not a scheme, then by signing up, you're giving us the ability to pressure your water company to get a scheme going. Water companies are really starting to catch on to how important this is, and we're seeing more and more schemes rolling out across the country, particularly in areas that do suffer from surface water flooding or combined sewer overflow events. So particularly with the new AMP8, which is the asset management plan, the funding plan for this year for water companies for the next 4 years, they're really investing heavily in trying to manage rainwater higher up the catchment. And I think that homeowners might be lucky in that they might find that water companies are willing to pay to have devices put in their homes. And you very rightly said water companies are keen to push this, but I would capitalise on it as a householder as well, because these are quite pretty things that you can use to water your car, lower your water bill, and are helping your community as well as helping the water company as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important thing. Maybe just to stress before we wrap up, it's like, I think from my perspective, I've always thought that people would choose to buy a water butt because they recognise that they want to put rainwater to good use, whether it's irrigating their plants, lawns, watering flowers and things, or washing their car, which of course is all very beneficial. And why pay, especially now at the higher prices, why pay to use mains water to do that when people might not see it as very lucky that it rains often in the UK as much as it does. But I think go and live somewhere where it doesn't, and you'll realise you are reasonably lucky. But with these, that's not. I know we're sort of repeating, we're dangerously close to repeating ourselves, but I really think it's worth saying again, because some people would say no, right, to having a free water butt, and perhaps they're not realising the collective benefit that they can have on their street, in their neighbourhood, in their town or whatever, because those might be the same people that are appalled by reading about sewage going into the sea. So,
yeah, and you can do both, can't you? So even if you're not going to use water in your garden, you can still have a water butt on your house, and you can still make a difference to your community whilst being appalled about sewage going into the sea. I think there's a lot of benefit that we can get from collective action and encouraging our regulators and our utilities to do more. But why not also at home take up the offer of a water butt that you can be using to disconnect your impermeable areas or attenuate flowing from your impermeable areas as well, so that you can have that benefit too.
Yeah, because it might seem insignificant on an individual level, but it is that collective impact, isn't it? Once you've got a street full, a village full, a house, a town full, whatever, if they are all collecting anything from 200 litres, 500 litres, 800 litres, whatever, per house, it adds up, and you've obviously, with some of your projects, seen the collective sort of impact of that.
Oh, absolutely. The cumulative effect is huge. If you think the average house area in the UK, I think it's about 55 square metres, and a millimetre of rain over a square metre is a litre of water. If you think about the amount of, I think we've had something like 250 millimetres of rain in Cornwall in the last month or so. If you think about the amount of water coming off your average house roof, you're talking about 15,000 litres of water. Multiply that out by a row of terraced houses and you're starting to get some really big numbers. And the reason we don't like using fresh water is because of the carbon cost of treating water. Well, there's a carbon cost of treating used water as well that ends up in the drainage network. You have to pump it to a treatment plant, and then you have to treat it. So when we're trying to tackle climate change by reducing our water demand, our water use, there's also a climate change impact to be had in reducing the carbon of treatment too. And that, as you say, that cumulative effect is really significant.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I don't think many people. I don't think it's one of the things that you think about when you buy a house that I don't think you ever think, and perhaps some people do, but I've never heard anyone saying that they then feel responsible for the rainwater that falls on that roof. I mean, it is their roof, so perhaps they should. But like, it's up to them to have an influence on where that goes and how it's used.
Yeah, there's a change of mindset, isn't there? We think about the wastewater that we produce, and we're happy to pay for that service. We pay for sort of recycling and waste services from the council. Maybe we need to be thinking about whether or not we need to take more responsibility for that rainwater that does land on our house. But I would encourage you to think about it as a real asset. That rainwater that you're capturing, every litre you use is taking a litre off your water bill, so it doesn't have to be something you're doing out of the goodness of your own heart. It's mutually beneficial too.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, feels like a very, very impactful way or sort of sentence to finish the podcast on. Thank you very much. I certainly found that very interesting. I think everything from if you're at the start of your sort of career and you're thinking, actually, I'm listening to a Water Matters podcast because this could be quite an interesting direction to go through study and then work. I think perhaps you've served as some inspiration. As I can't even remember the name of the course you said you did. Just one more time. What did you?
Hydroinformatics engineering.
There we go. So that's one to be looked into by some. But also just I think it's fascinating to hear what else is going on in your, as you say, you do quite a bit of work with water companies and water authorities and stuff, so it's very interesting to hear from your perspective what individual households can do connected with that as well. And so thank you very much for sharing.
No, thank you so much. It was lovely to chat to you.
Appreciate it. And so thanks for listening. We will be back in 2 weeks' time with the next episode of the Water Matters podcast. In the meantime, if you've liked this video, please hit the like button. Please subscribe if you're not subscribed already. And remember that if you go to watermatters.life, that's where you can sign up to receive the weekly digital newsletter that gets sent round in addition to this podcast. But thanks again for listening, and we'll be back in 2 weeks' time.